Okay guys, today we are going to talk about solving percent problems using a proportion to solve those percents. So we're going to start off by just explaining what the basic setup is for the percent proportion. What you have anytime, first off, a proportion is two fractions that are equal to each other. It's two ratios that are equal to each other. And that's what a percent is. When we're solving these percent problems, we have two ratios. The percent is one ratio, and then the other values are the other ratio. So to start off with the percent, on one side of your proportion, you will have your percent over 100. So whatever percent you're given, say it's 16%, 20%, that number goes over 100 because that's the definition of a percent. It means out of 100. So when we're solving a percent problem, one side of our proportion will always have the number that's the percent on top of 100. On the other side, we have the part over the whole. So we have the portion that we're finding a percent of over the total. The whole is the total. So that usually is our percent problem. Now, sometimes you might hear this referred to as is over of, because those are good keywords to use in these problems. If you see the word is right before a number or right after a number, that usually indicates that's your part. Of is the one I usually focus on. It's a little more reliable. Whatever number comes after the word of in a problem is your whole. Okay, it's your total. It's the one that's going to go on the bottom of your ratio. So let's use this to do this first problem. What is 16% of 25? Well, 16% is our percent, so we're going to set up our proportion starting by putting the 16 over 100. Next step is determine which one goes on the top or the bottom for my part over whole part. Since the word of is followed by 25, that's my whole. That's how you recognize which one goes on the bottom. So whatever's after the word of goes on the bottom. And since the is part is unknown, it's asking us what is 16% of 25. That's our unknown value. That's what we'll use for x to represent. So here's our proportion we're going to use to solve. When we solve for x, that gives us our answer. That tells us what is 16% of 25. To solve a proportion, you multiply the x times the 100, the means and the extremes, if you've heard it called that, or cross products. So we multiply x times 100 to get 100x, put our equal sign, and then we multiply 25 times 16. And you can do that off to the side or on a calculator. So 100x equals, and 25 times 16 is 400. And now to solve for x, I divide both sides by 100, and I get x equals 4. And that's my answer. The answer is 4. 4 is 16% of 25. Okay, let's look at another problem. 45 is what percent of 50? I'm going to set up my proportion. And I know one of them is going to be over 100. Now in this case, I don't know my percent. It doesn't give me a percent, so that's my unknown value. I'll put x over 100 in this case. On the other side, the part over whole part, I look for the word of. So whatever follows the word of goes on the bottom. That's your whole. So 50 goes on the bottom, 45 is the part, goes on the top. And that's our proportion that we solve. So again, we do cross products. We multiply 50 times x, put an equal sign, and multiply 45 times 100, which is 4,500. And then I solve for x by dividing both sides by 50. And when I do that, I can cross out two zeros by you're basically dividing the top and bottom by 10 to kind of simplify that fraction. And I have 450 over 5, which is 90. So that's my answer to 45 is what percent of 50, it's 90%. And you always want to make sure your answer makes sense. 45 is pretty close to 50, so it should be close to 100%. 90% makes sense. It's a reasonable answer. Okay, here's another one. 60 is 30% of what? Start by setting up a proportion. Something's going to go over 100. In this case, my percent is 30, so that's what goes on top of the 100. The part over whole, I look for the word of. That's my whole. In this case, I don't know it. It's asking us of what, so that's my unknown. That's what goes on the bottom. X is my unknown. 60 goes on the top. So what I'm looking for is 60 out of what equals 30%. Solve this proportion by using cross products. We're going to multiply 30 times x, put an equal sign, and multiply 60 times 100. Then I divide both sides by 30 to solve for x. I'm going to cross out a 0 to kind of simplify that. And I get 200 for x. So 60 is 30% of 200, and that makes sense. 30% would be less than half. 60 is less than half of 200, so it seems like a reasonable answer. Okay, let's try this one. What percent of 120 is 36? So we'll start with our percent problem part of the proportion. Something's going to go over 100. Since my percent is unknown, it says what percent. I don't know it. So I'm going to use an x to represent that unknown. Now the other ratio, the part over whole, look for the word of, and that is going to be what goes on the bottom. So 120 goes on the bottom. That means 36 goes in the last spot left. And then we'll solve for x. So 120 times x, and then 36 times 100 is 3600. Put an equal sign between those. And we're going to divide both sides by 120 to solve for x. And when I'm dividing here, I'm basically doing 12 into 360, which is 30. So I get that x is 30. Since I was looking for a percent, put your percent symbol, because the answer is that 30% of 120 is equal to 36. Okay, just one more. 60% of what is 48? Set up your ratio. I'm given a percent this time. My percent is 60, so that's what goes over the 100. On the other side, look for the word of first. That's what goes on the bottom. That's your whole. So in this case, it's of what? So it's unknown. I don't know what my whole is. I'll put an x in the bottom spot. The top is 48. So 48 out of what is equal to 60% is what I'm looking for. So we'll solve using cross products. 60 times x is 60x. Put an equal sign between them and multiply the other two together. 48 times 100 is 4800. And then I just need to solve for x by dividing both sides by 60. And in this case, I get x is equal to 80. 6 into 480 will be 80. So 60% of 80 is 48, and that makes sense because 48 is a little more than half. 60% should be a little bit more than half. So that's all there is to setting up a proportion to solve a percent problem. And we can solve for the percent itself, or the part, or the whole using this method.